I'm Cindy Matthews. I live in beautiful Bruce County, southeast of Paisley. Today I'll be speaking a little bit about what are the areas where I derive some inspiration, and hopefully that will spark some interest in you in writing. And also, I'll be talking a little bit about my process. Did you know that ideas for writing are everywhere? It's really true. If you go on a walk, if you're in a cafe, such as after COVID, if you listen in on conversations, if you read the obituaries in the newspaper or online, if you notice everyday things in a slightly different way than other people, if you ask what-if questions, if you notice how people talk, how they really put their sentences together, if you travel, even from where you live now, to a place that's 10 minutes away by car, if you notice what is different about that experience, if you're curious about things that are weird, if you are a news junkie, if you like to listen in on conversations between family members, I think you get the gist. There are ideas everywhere. Don't be afraid to think of your ideas as maybe weird or different, but that is what makes them so much more interesting. I believe that everything that needed to be said has already been said. Everything about love has already been said, but maybe it hasn't been said in a certain way, or maybe it hasn't been spoken about in a way that people can connect with in a different way than in previous love books. So I want you to think about that ideas are everywhere, and that one or two of these ideas might spark interest in you to write about something in a totally different way because you've thought about the regular aspects of life in a different way. Inspirations are meant to be written down, whether you write them on a post-it note, in a journal, in a notebook, on foolscap, in your phone, if you email yourself. It doesn't matter how you record the ideas, it matters that you record the ideas. Lots of times when I'm in that spot, that sweet spot between being awake and asleep, ideas pop into my head. Strange, weird ideas that I might want to explore in my writing. If I don't write them down, I promise you they are lost. They're lost forever. And sometimes some of the best ideas come to me during that sweet spot between sleeping and being awake. So I just want you to remember that if you're on a walk trying to find inspiration, perhaps bring your phone with you. I'm sure that you would. And if ideas pop into your head, no matter how mundane or interesting or boring or exciting, record them. Inspiration for ideas can also come from books, stories, poetry that we read, music, other media such as films, movies, documentaries. It's important, I believe, to read in the genre you want to write in. In other words, if I didn't read and study short stories as a form, I don't think I'd be as successful in getting them out there into the public to read. I wouldn't be having a collection of short stories published by a publisher. I wouldn't really understand how to write because I wouldn't have enough well-rounded background of some of the possible forms that a short story can take. It doesn't mean you have to go to university or college or anything like that. It means that you need to love the form so much that you read it and read it and read it. I read many of my favorite short stories and some that I don't love over and over so that I can learn the way that the author put together the story. What works, what doesn't work, how dialogue was used, that sort of thing. So I would encourage you to study story as much as you possibly can. What works for me is to write my stories longhand. I am a left-handed person, so I have arrows going every which way. I have lines and dashes and circles where I don't know what to put, so I just leave it and go on with the writing. It might not work for you to write longhand, but I would encourage you to try. And the reason that I encourage you is because I find it allows me to be more artistic and creative because I'm using a different part of my brain to do the writing. The actual physical effort of writing is more like, to me, like painting and closer connected to being freer in my creativity. So I would encourage you to think about that. I'm not saying you can't create by typing or by tapping into whatever you tap into, but I would encourage you to think about what I'm saying. After I have written a story, let's say about the equivalent of around 2,000 words, give or take, then the next day I type or transcribe my writing for at least a week. I don't go back and reread it. I don't play with it. I don't edit it. I don't do anything to it. I just leave it. In my experience, storing a story away for at least a week before I come back and do some rewriting, editing, that sort of thing, allows me to take time away from the piece and be less married to the words and to the concepts that I've put on the page. Giving it time and space allows me to come back and be more honest and organic in my cuts. Sometimes I really love the way I said something in a particular sentence, but when I come back to it a week later, I realize that the sentence is either not necessary or was already said earlier or doesn't help move the story forward. So if you give a story time and space, if you put it in the vault for a week, at least a week, and come back to it to do some rewriting, terrific. And what I find is it's very helpful to print out my story, to see it typed on one side of the paper. And that way, if I want to cut up the actual pages of my story and move parts around, I can start to see the story in a slightly different way. Sometimes the first draft and subsequent tweaks of that draft are not the best that story can be. Sometimes if a story is written in third person, he and she and they, sometimes it's better if I write it from first person using I or we. Sometimes if I've written 2,000 words, I set myself a goal of cutting out 400 of them. And that's called tightening. So these are all important processes before I'm ready to share it with anyone else. Usually by the 4th, 5th, 6th, even 7th version of my story, there are bits and pieces that still can be trimmed, but I'm satisfied at this point to start to read it out loud to myself. And the reason I do that is so that I can hear the bits that work and the bits that don't. I can start to hear where I have too many S's in a row. I can hear where I stumble when I read. I can hear where the mistakes are and where the precious moments are. I can hear where I've repeated the same idea too many times. So it's another part of the process that I use in writing. An important process for me that I believe in greatly is workshopping a story. What I'm trying to emphasize is that it's important to workshop your story, to read it to others, to get their take on things, to let them give you an idea of what's working and what isn't working. And then you can take that feedback and again tweak your story. Only at this point, and only through all this hard work, in my opinion and experience, are you able to send out a story as a submission to an online publisher, a print publisher, whichever market you think is suitable for the type of story that you have written. I want you to know a couple of things first about this. About 97% of my submissions are turned down, and that is not uncommon. That is very common, in fact. Sometimes it doesn't mean that your writing isn't bad or isn't good. It isn't about that. It's about that your particular piece is not a good fit for that particular magazine or online journal or whatever it is that you're submitting to. It is part of the business to be turned down, to be rejected, and you need to have thick skin about that, and you need to just get busy on another project while your stories are out there being considered. There's also really something wonderful about coming to a piece that you already have. I really enjoy that process of tweaking something so much that it's totally different, but the essences are still there. It's just a different story because maybe you told it from a different point of view, or perhaps you changed it from being 2,000 words to 1,000 words. To contact me through my website, if you go to cindymatthews.ca or simply Google my name, I promise I will answer any questions that you have. It's my pleasure. Thank you.